I've been kind of racking my brain about this for most of the day since the news broke. Um, Personally, I would have suspended him. I feel like this is the exact thing that most fans are extremely upset about, which is NASCAR not being consistent. We saw two drivers. Now, granted, these were at high speed ovals in Charlotte and Las Vegas, but we saw them be consistent in two separate instances in 2022 and 2023, where drivers intentionally took out a competitor via a right hook and put them into the wall. Now, since then, there was, I would call the Hocevar incident an outlier because they were under caution, and frankly, I don't think that was the intent of what was happening there, but it looked bad, and therefore you have to penalize them somehow. You can't do that kind of stuff under caution. But if they had suspended Hocevar last year, I really wouldn't have had that much of a problem with it. That is a move in the right rear hook that should not be permissible in the NASCAR Cup Series or any division of stock car racing. It's something that they have outlawed at high speed ovals, but we saw Austin Cindric chase Ty Dillon across the track over 3 or 4 lanes, just like Bubba Wallace did to Kyle Larson at Las Vegas. And the same result pretty much happened in that a car ended up in the wall. It was a horrific look for Cindric, who had an exceptional start to this year and for the most part had cleaned up his image of being a rough and dirty driver in the Xfinity series at times. But it was extremely disappointing to see him resort to that, especially on lap 5 of the race? We have 95 laps left, dude. You can't be doing stuff like that. So for me personally, I totally would have suspended him. I think obviously a 50-point driver penalty and a massive fine is in effect suspending him for a race because it takes away, I think, 83% of your possible points output for a race if you win both stages and win the race. But I just leave this situation more puzzled and disappointed in the sport and its officiating, and I'm starting to lose faith that they actually know what their rules are.
I was going to bring up the 50 points essentially being a suspension of a race. I'm glad you mentioned that at the end. I think I'll start by saying I often find myself, I'll acknowledge the bias out of the gate. I often find myself with a bias in favor of the Penske cars and against the Dillon brothers, as may have been previously mentioned in this show. So I thought, I was like, okay, let's flip. I think we also just have to say, okay, Austin Cindric, playoff level driver versus Ty Dillon driving in that college car, not in a playoff level driver. I feel like even if you're not like a Penske fan, that can still skew maybe the view on the scenario a little bit. So I flipped it in my head. I was like, okay, if Ty Dillon right hooked Austin Cindric down the straightaway there, what's my take on that? And I think looking at it that way, I can agree with the points penalty. I have no take, more or less, whatever on the points thing. And I'm also fine with no suspension. I feel like the suspension line is crossed, it becomes more of a safety concern. A points penalty and a fine, to me, that is like a sporting problem. Like, you were not following our like sportsman code of conduct, and that is bad, and we're going to clean this up. Versus a suspension line, for me, that cross is more of a like, this could have been like horrifically bad if a few things went a different way, and that was irresponsible, and you should not be driving a car for a week. Austin Cindric, he tore up a race car, and that was bad, and he had a massive points penalty that's the equivalent of more than a race, and they're losing some cash. I think this is a fair penalty for what it was, and I understand that this is different. This is a different penalty compared to the intermediate mile and a half versus at a road course, but also these are different situations. That right hook, I find it hard to believe that whatever situation led to that bump and right hook on a road course, I don't think that would. I find it very hard to believe that Austin Cindric would have done the same thing if they were racing at a mile and a half, because it's so different. This was a road course, the crime was different on a road course, so the punishment can also be different on a road course.
I don't know. For me, that runs the risk of copycats. And that's just not a move I want to see at any point at any racetrack. And frankly, I don't think the fans should want to see it either, because ultimately the intent of a right hook and what it ultimately delivers ends up being the same, which is a driver side impact into the wall, which we've seen has caused multiple injuries to a number of drivers throughout the years. And I really don't care what facility it is, whether it's Martinsville, COTA, Charlotte. I don't care. That kind of stuff just doesn't have a place in the sport. And, you know, you've had a number of drivers speak out about it this week, notably Kyle Busch on Sirius XM. He said that this is something that he doesn't want to see at any level of the sport and at any kind of track. And he's kind of getting fed up with NASCAR kind of being all wishy-washy about it. And like, I feel like more drivers that, let's say if Austin Cindric was in the playoffs already and did that, the 50 points don't mean anything to him anymore. So he can just do that for free. And like I said, I just don't want to see this kind of move replicated. I want drivers to know that, like, there's a hard line on the right rear quarter panel of cars. And if you cross that line, there is a swift and definitive punishment. And them kind of totaling out different points for different, like, versions of the same infraction just seems silly. Make it outlawed and don't allow them to even have the option. And granted, there are some situations, like I believe Cindric got into Austin Dillon at Gateway a couple of years ago, which Kyle Busch did mention in that interview. And I do disagree with him about that incident. There was clearly no intent in that one, but there are certain situations where someone's going to clip someone's right rear by accident and cause an accident. Obviously, we don't want to see that either, but that can be explained away. But you swerving over several lanes of traffic to attack a guy like that, it lacks decorum, it lacks respect for your competitors, and he did it on the front straightaway in front of the massive, like the most massive amount of fans he could have done it in front of. Like, the whole thing just disgusts me. And that's coming from somebody that has, you know, carried the water for Austin Cindric at certain points in his career, even when he's been a bit over aggressive. So yeah, I'm really disappointed in him, but I'm more disappointed in NASCAR for refusing to have a backbone yet again. This whole penalizing guys X amount of points for what is essentially the same thing just seems stupid.
That makes me wonder. Here's a follow-up question for you, Tanner, starting with you.
Sure.
We know now NASCAR has this rule. If you get suspended and you get a playoff waiver, you forfeit the playoff points you've earned. We didn't have this rule when Chase Elliott got suspended for the Coca-Cola 600 incident. Do you think now this sort of weighs in on NASCAR? Like, well, we could suspend a driver, but at this early on the season, he's going to have Austin Cindric, if he's suspended, if he gets that waiver approved, he forfeits his playoff points, almost takes him out of the championship unless he wins every single race. Do you think that might be now something NASCAR's officials are considering when they're discussing these penalties?
You don't write rules to bite your nails over them later on. You write them so that way you have a set of operations to do once a situation arises. And NASCAR bites their nails way too much in these kinds of situations for me, to where it should just be simple. And I think that Austin Cindric probably should have had that particular rule in mind. So yeah, I really don't have a whole lot of sympathy for him or NASCAR in this situation. I just think that at the end of the day, you just need to outlaw this move. It's dangerous, and the more guys do it at certain tracks, they're going to start trying to do it at other places too. So just cut the snake off at its head and stop dealing with the BS that keeps falling out of it.